26. "Well, Kapitanich," said Sereja, as on the day before his birthday he returned rosy and bright from a walk, and gave his overcoat to the tall old hall porter, who looked smilingly down from his height at the little fellow. "Well, has the bandaged official been today? Has Papa seen him?" "He has seen him. As soon as the secretary left, I announced him," answered the hall porter with a wink. "Let me take it off for you." "Sereja," said his tutor, a Slav, stopping in the doorway that led to the inner rooms, "take it off yourself." But Sereja, though he heard his tutor's weak voice, paid no heed to it. He stood holding on by the porter's shoulder strap and looking into his face. "Well, and has Papa done what he wanted?" The hall porter nodded affirmatively. The bandaged official, who had called 7 times to petition Karenina about something, interested both Sereja and the hall porter. Sereja had met him in the hall and had heard him piteously begging the porter to announce him to Karenina, and saying that he and his children were face to face with death. Since then, having again met the official in the hall, Sereja had become interested in him. "And was he very glad?" he asked. "How could he help being glad? He nearly jumped for joy as he went away." "And has anything been brought?" inquired Sereja, after a pause. "Well, sir," said the porter, shaking his head and whispering, "there is something from the Countess." Sereja knew at once that the hall porter was speaking of a birthday present for him from the Countess Lydia Ivanovna. "You don't say so. Where is it?" "Corney has taken it in to your papa. I should think it's a fine thing." "What size? About so big?" "Not quite, but a fine thing." "A book?" "No, just a thing. Go, go. Vasily Lukitch is calling you," said the hall porter, hearing the approaching step of the tutor, and gently disengaging the little hand in the half-drawn-off glove, which held him by his shoulder strap, as he nodded and winked toward the tutor. "Vasily Lukitch, one moment," said Sereja with that bright and affectionate smile, which always overcame the conscientious Vasily Lukitch. Sereja was in too high spirits, too happy not to share with his friend the hall porter another family joy about which he had heard from Lydia Ivanovna's niece, whom he met walking in the summer gardens. This joy appeared to him particularly important because it coincided with the satisfaction of the official, and his own happiness that a present had been brought. To Sereja, it seemed that this day was one on which everybody ought to be happy and gay. "Do you know, Papa has received the Order of Alexander Nevsky?" "Of course I do. People have already been calling to congratulate him." "Well, and is he pleased?" "How can he help being pleased at the Tsar's favor? It shows he's deserved it," replied the hall porter sternly and seriously. Sereja grew thoughtful as he peered into the hall porter's face, which he had studied in minute detail, especially the chin which hung beneath the grey whiskers, and which no one saw but Sereja, who always looked up at him. "And your daughter? Has she been here lately?" The hall porter's daughter was a ballet dancer. "How can she come on weekdays? They have to learn too, and so must you, sir. Go along." On entering the schoolroom, instead of sitting down to his lessons, Sereja told his tutor of his guess that the parcel that had been brought must be a railway train. "What do you think?" he asked. But Vasily Lukitch only thought that Sereja must prepare his grammar lesson, as his teacher was coming at 2. "Oh, but just tell me, Vasily Lukitch," said Sereja, suddenly, after sitting down at the table with the book in his hand. "What is higher than the Alexander Nevsky? You know Papa has received the Order of Alexander Nevsky." Vasily Lukitch replied that the Order of Vladimir was higher. "And higher still?" "The highest is the St. Andrew." "And higher still?" "I don't know." "Even you don't know?" And Sereja, leaning his elbows on the table, began to reflect. His reflections were most complex and varied. He imagined his father suddenly receiving the orders of Vladimir and St. Andrew, and how much kinder in consequence he would be today at lesson time, and how he himself, when he grew up, would receive all the orders, and that they would invent one higher than the St. Andrew. As soon as it was invented, he would gain it. A yet higher one would be invented, and he would immediately get that one too. In these reflections, time passed until the teacher arrived. The lesson on the attributes of time, place, and manner of action had not been learned. The teacher was not only dissatisfied, but also saddened. His sadness touched Sir Edgar. He did not feel guilty for not having learned his lesson, for try as he would, he positively could not do it. While the teacher was explaining, he believed him and seemed to understand, but as soon as he was left alone, he positively could not remember or understand how so short and simple a word as suddenly could be an attribute of the manner of action. But all the same he was sorry he had grieved his teacher. He chose a moment when the teacher was looking silently into the book. "Mikhail Ivanovich, when is your birthday?" he suddenly asked. "You would do better to think of your work. Birthdays do not signify anything to reasonable beings. It is just a day like any other, on which we must work." Sir Edgar looked attentively at his teacher, at his thin little beard and his spectacles, which had slipped down the bridge of his nose, and became so engrossed in thought that he no longer heard what his teacher was explaining. He was aware that the teacher himself did not believe what he was saying. He felt that by the tone in which the words were uttered. But why have they all agreed to speak in the same way about the dullest and most useless things? Why does he repulse me? Why does he not love me? He asked himself sadly, and could find no answer. "27. After the teacher's lesson, Sir Edgar had a lesson from his father. Before his father came, Sir Edgar sat at the table playing with a pocket knife and thinking. Among his favourite occupations was keeping a lookout for his mother when he went out walking. He did not believe in death in general, and especially not in her death, despite what Lydia Ivanovna had told him, and his father had confirmed. And therefore, even after he had been told she was dead, he went on looking for her when on his walks. He imagined that every well-developed and graceful woman with dark hair was his mother. At the sight of any such woman, a feeling of such tenderness awoke in his heart that he grew breathless and tears came to his eyes. He expected that at any moment she would approach and lift her veil. Then he would see her whole face, she would smile, embrace him, and he would smell her peculiar scent, feel the tenderness of her touch, and cry with joy as he had done one evening when he lay at her feet and she tickled him, while he shook with laughter and bit her white hand with the rings on the fingers. Later on, when he accidentally heard from his nurse that she was not dead, and his father and Lydia Ivanovna explained that to him she was dead because she was bad, which he could not at all believe, for he loved her, he continued to look out for and wait for her. There had been a lady with a purple veil in the summer garden today, whom he had watched with a sinking heart as she came toward him along the path. The lady did not come up to them and disappeared somewhere. Today, Sir Edgar was more than ever conscious of a flow of love for his mother in his heart. And now, as he sat lost in thought, waiting for his father, he notched the whole edge of the table with his knife, looking before him with shining eyes and thinking about her. Vasily Lukitch roused him. "Your papa is coming." Sir Edgar jumped up, approached his father, kissed his hand, and looked at him attentively, trying to find some sign of his joy at receiving the order of Alexander Nevsky. "Have you had a nice walk?" asked Karenina, as he sat down in his armchair, drew toward him an Old Testament and opened it. Although Karenina had more than once told Sir Edgar that every Christian ought to be well acquainted with Bible history, he often, in Old Testament history, had to consult the book, and Sir Edgar noticed this. "Yes, Papa, it was very amusing," answered Sir Edgar, sitting down sideways on his chair and beginning to rock it, which was forbidden. "I met Nadenka." Nadenka was Lydia Ivanovna's niece, who was being educated at her aunt's house. "She told me you had received another order, a new one. Are you glad, Papa?" "First of all, don't rock your chair," said Karenina. "Secondly, it's not the reward, but the work that's precious. I wish you understood that. You see, if you take pains and learn in order to get a reward, the work will seem hard. But when you work," Karenina said this, remembering how he had sustained himself that morning by a sense of duty in the dull task of signing 118 papers. "If you love your work, you will find your reward in that." Saraja's eyes, that had been shining with affection and joy, grew dull and drooped under his father's gaze. It was the same long familiar tone in which his father always addressed him, and to which Saraja had already learned to adapt himself. His father always talked to him, Saraja felt, as if he were some imaginary boy out of a book, quite unlike Saraja. And with his father, he always tried to pretend to be that boy out of a book. "You understand me, I hope," said the father. "Yes, Papa," answered the boy, pretending to be that imaginary boy. The lesson consisted in learning by heart some verses from the Gospels, and repeating the beginning of the Old Testament. Saraja knew the Gospel verses pretty well, but while saying them, he became so absorbed in the contemplation of a bone in his father's forehead, which turned very sharply above the temple, that he became confused, and put the end of one verse where the same word occurred after the beginning of another. It was evident to Karenina that the boy did not understand what he was saying, and this irritated him. He frowned and began an explanation that Saraja had heard many times already, and could never remember because he understood it too clearly. Just as he could not remember that the word "suddenly" was an attribute of the manner of action. Saraja looked at his father with scared eyes, and could only think of whether his father would make him repeat what he had just said, as he sometimes did. This thought frightened him so much that he no longer understood anything at all. However, his father did not make him repeat it, but went on to the lesson from the Old Testament. Saraja related the events themselves quite well, but when he had to answer questions as to what some of the events symbolized, he knew nothing about it, though he had been punished before for not knowing his lesson. The part, however, about which he could not say anything at all, but only floundered, cut the table and rocked his chair, was that about the antediluvian patriarchs. He did not know any of them, except Eunuch, who was taken up to heaven alive. Previously he had remembered the others' names, but now he had quite forgotten them, chiefly because Eunuch was his favourite in the whole Old Testament, and attached to Eunuch's being taken up to heaven there was a long string of thought in his head, which now occupied his mind while he looked fixedly at his father's watch chain and a half-unfastened button of his waistcoat. He did not in the least believe in death, which was so often mentioned to him. He did not believe that people he loved could die, nor above all that he himself would die. That seemed to him quite impossible and incomprehensible. But he was told that everybody would die. He had even asked people whom he trusted, and they all confirmed it. His nurse too said so, though reluctantly. But Eunuch had not died, so not everybody died. And why should not anybody deserve the same in God's sight, and be taken up to heaven alive? Thought Saraja. Bad people, that is to say those he did not like, might die, but the good ones might all be like Eunuch. Well, who were the patriarchs? Eunuch, Enos. But you've already mentioned them. This is bad, Saraja, very bad. If you do not take pains to know what is most necessary for a Christian, then what can interest you? I am displeased with you, and Peter Ignatich, this was the chief educationalist, is also displeased with you. I shall have to punish you. His father and the educationalist were both displeased with Saraja, and he had really learned badly. Yet it could not all be said that he was an incapable boy. On the contrary, he was far more capable than the boys whom the educationalist set before him as models. His father, from his point of view, considered that the boy did not try to learn what he was being taught. As a matter of fact, he could not learn it. He could not, because there were more urgent demands on his soul than those put forward by his father and the educationalist. The two kinds of demands were opposed, and he was in direct conflict with his instructors. He was 9 years old and quite a child, but he knew his soul. It was dear to him, and he guarded it as the eyelid guards the eye, and never let anyone enter his heart without the key of love. His instructors complained that he would not learn, yet his soul was overflowing with longing for knowledge. So he learnt, from Kapitonich, from his nurse, from Nadenka, and from Vasily Lukic, but not from his teachers. The water, which his father and the educationalists expected would turn their mill wheels, had long since leaked out, and was working somewhere else. His father punished Sergeja by not letting him go to see Lydia Ivanovna's niece Nadenka. But this punishment turned out luckily for Sergeja. Vasily Lukich was in good spirits and showed him how to make windmills. He spent all the evening working and dreaming how a windmill could be made on which one could ride, either by seizing one of the sails or by tying oneself to it and spinning round. He did not think about his mother all the evening, but when in bed he suddenly remembered her, and prayed in his own words that tomorrow, on his birthday, she should stop hiding herself and should come to him. "Vasily Lukich, do you know for what I've been praying extra?" "To learn better?" "No." "For toys?" "No, you will never guess. It's lovely, but a secret. When it comes true I will tell you. You have not guessed." "No, I can't guess. You'd better tell me," said Vasily Lukich, smiling, which he rarely did. "Well, lie down and I'll put out the candle." "But I can see better without a candle what I've been praying for." "There, I nearly told you the secret," said Sergeja with a merry laugh. When the candle had been taken away, he heard and felt his mother. She stood above him and caressed him with a loving look. But then windmills appeared, and a knife, and all became confused, and he fell asleep.